Celeste was developed and published by Maddie Thorson and their team under their studio Matt Makes Games in 2018. Rated everyone 10 and up by the ESRB, the game is geared towards an audience of players who grew up playing platforming games such as Mario. It stands as, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful experiences of the 2010s, and one of my favorite games of all time. As stated, Celeste is a classic platforming game, featuring side-scrolling and gameplay similar to legacy Mario titles. This gives it a sense of nostalgia among modern games. Celeste's mechanics are, in truth, quite run-of-the-mill. It features standard running and jumping mechanics, with platforms and obstacles such as spikes. The main unique mechanic of the game is the dash, which Madeline can use once before she has to land on stable ground once again to regain it. Later on in the game, there are new mechanics here and there, such as these bubbles that give you a ride in one direction, but nothing too revolutionary or novel. And yet, Celeste's simple mechanics are some of the best game design elements of the game. Together, they provide the player with the ability to always understand the roadmap needed to pass a screen or level, ultimately resulting in the player always feeling in control. This emerges in the dynamics of the game, where most of the game features the player using the mechanics they currently understand and increasing their literacy with the control scheme to scale more and more difficult obstacles. Unlike a more puzzle-oriented game like Portal, however, Celeste's gameplay focuses more on making the player become more and more accurate with the controls in order to progress. Put simply, Celeste is bone-crushingly hard. Players attempt each screen over and over until they get through it. However, Celeste uniquely utilizes narrative and aesthetic elements to counteract a frustrating system of mechanics. For example, the game highlights many reassuring phrases, and the game displays your death count as a badge of honor, telling you that you tried hard and you finally made it. This ignites the player's perseverance, making them want to keep playing screens over and over again until they make it through. Aesthetically, the game features a lot of challenge, but it is always able to balance it out with other elements. Thematically, the game deals with depression, the theme of the game being that climbing Celeste Mountain is akin to dealing with depression, and thus the mechanics act as supporting in that metaphor. For much of the game, you attempt screens over and over again, but slowly, you get more and more comfortable with the challenges and controls until you finally make it to the top. Another interesting element of the mechanics and dynamics are the strawberries. Any player seeing these, noticing the remote locations in which they are located, and the difficulty of grabbing them will understand immediately that they are a collectible item. Without saying it directly at first, they afford being collected. However, the game later assures you that you don't have to collect them if you don't want to, and that they provide nothing in return besides the gratification of achieving them. Given these elements, the game positions itself as a game that exists as whatever you want it to be. Aesthetically, it is paradoxically quite relaxing to play, at least for me, despite the fact that you are constantly playing levels over and over again. If we remove the flexibility yielded by the game's attitude towards failure, however, and instead I give myself the restriction of only being allowed to die once, before restarting the whole chapter, the entire pathos of the game changes. The dynamics of the game shift completely from exploration to streamlining and taking as few risks as possible, because dying would mean repeating the entire chain of streams. My usual approach to levels is to run in and go as far as I can, as usually failing a jump means absolutely nothing. But here, I hesitated at many points and tried to plan out a course. In that vein, I didn't attempt a single strawberry, simply electing that there was no point taking the risk. The game transitioned from being about perseverance to being about perfection, which may not be a bad thing, but it was totally dissonant with Celeste's aesthetics. However, it did let me experience the game in a different way, which was very interesting. I realized I became pretty good at memorizing the levels, and was able to run through better and better each time. All in all, I would definitely recommend any person interested in indie games to play Celeste, especially as a game that centrally features mechanic as metaphor really well. It's also a great game in terms of narrative, with relatively few overt story elements and cutscenes. It tells a touching story about a girl overcoming her ambitions, self-image, and depression. It's just really good.